Hi, I'm Mike Lowe for Digital Camera, and today we're looking at the new Nikon D7000 DSLR. There are a number of new features on this camera. It's got a 16.2 megapixel CMOS sensor at the camera's heart, which is capable of recording both still images and 1080p HD movie at 24 frames per second. There's also a new 39-point autofocus system and a 2016 pixel RGB metering sensor as well. On the rear of the camera there's a 3-inch LCD screen which is a 920,000 dot resolution, which is the same as a VGA resolution. Above this there's a viewfinder here which has 100% field of view both horizontally and vertically, which essentially means you get exactly what you're seeing through the viewfinder is what you'll get on the final frame. As the D7000 can be found towards the top end of the consumer range, it's pretty fast. It can shoot up to 6 frames per second in a continuous burst mode, which is pretty close to the Nikon D300S, which can shoot 7 frames per second. Also, in addition to the new 16.2 megapixel sensor, there's a XP2 image processing engine, which can produce images from ISO 100 through to 6400 as standard. There's also a high 1 and high 2 option that can produce ISO 12800 all the way through to 25600. On the top of the camera, there's a top panel here which displays all of the most prominent settings, and it can be illuminated by flicking over the on switch. There's a AF illumination lamp which lights up subjects in dark conditions and is very useful for those types of shots. And then as the camera comes around, there's a function button tucked in just below the front thumb wheel, and towards the bottom of the camera there's a depth of field preview button as well. The rear of the camera will be fairly familiar to those who currently use Nikon cameras, with the array of buttons here to the side. There's also a standard D-pad for operation here, and below this you can lock the specific focus point you're using as so. Underneath that there's an info button which is particularly useful to bring up a screen of all the current options and even move and adjust those like so. There's also a new switch here that when you click it across jumps into the live view option, and once you're in live view you can simply press the movie button embedded within it once and it jumps straight into recording movies. The new Multicam 4800DX autofocus system is also particularly impressive. This can be used in a number of ways, and you can use all 39 points across the sensor array. This can be used in an automatic or a 3D mode that can track subjects. There's also a 9-point center array, a 21-point selection. You can make a single point selection which can be adjusted using the D-pad and locked into a certain position as you please. So the amount of control is very significant. If you then access the menus, the level of detail increases even more as you're able to adjust things like how quickly the continuous autofocus will readjust the focus between one subject and another. The autofocus points can light up or not depending on whether you want them to. There's a focus point wraparound which could be useful for certain scenarios, and the detail level is significant and more towards the pro end of the market than the consumer level in which this camera sits. When in live view mode, the contrast detect-based system used is obviously not as fast as the 39-point system used through the viewfinder, but it's still fairly reasonable. This is also the same type that's used when you're recording movies, and the choice is either having a single point of focus where you press the shutter halfway in order to refocus. Otherwise there's a full-time autofocus which will automatically adjust the focus points depending on where the camera is facing during recording. When in burst mode, the camera is capable of shooting at 6 frames per second, and it does this very successfully. Even in continuous autofocus, a rapid speed between focusing on a moving subject is still possible also. If you're just shooting in JPEG fine, you can shoot up to 100 frames, no problem at all at 6 frames per second. It's only when you start shooting in the RAW mode that the limitations of the buffer become a little bit apparent. And if you shoot 10 or 11 frames, you'll then get an initial pause, which can cause some disruption. The brand new 2016 pixel RGB sensor does a reasonable job of metering, though the mid to shadow areas are generally exposed for, and this can often leave shots quite overexposed. With a high 16.2 megapixel resolution, the general lack of image noise throughout the ISO range is an impressive feat to behold. There's a great clarity to images from ISO 100 to 800, and although colour and some luminance noise becomes noticeable hereafter, it's not wildly disruptive to final quality. In fact, even images at ISO 3200 produce a grain-like quality that provides a good texture quality to prints. ISO 6400 is the top-end setting for more critical use, as colour noise reveals itself more in shadow areas. and the high 1 and high 2 setting option should only really be used for emergencies, as these can get particularly noisy. At around £1,300, the D7000 isn't exactly cheap, but then you're getting loads for your money. A lot of people will compare this to Canon 60D, but the two different cameras have quite different areas in which they specialise in, and one might be better in one part, one in another. Overall though, this offers an excellent autofocus system, the images are of great quality, the battery life lasts for ages, and you're getting a really almost pro-spec camera at the top end of a consumer bracket. It's hard to fault, and overall we gave it 92% in our Gold Award.